So today I'm going to be doing a whole different format for this kind of tutorial video. Usually I do a whole script and write the whole video out before I start recording, but I think it'll make a lot more sense and it'll have a lot more flow if I do it like this. So anyway, this video is going to be all about events and how to connect functions to them and how to run code when things happen. Also, it doesn't take 10 hours to do it this way. Let's get started. So when you create a new script over here in the Explorer menu, you get this nice little fancy stuff. We're going to get rid of that because we hate it. Now, if you want code to run, you could just start typing code. Like, say I want to change the name of the script. Script.name equals this. Hello. It would run, but it just kind of runs once and it just runs. It would be nice to be able to control what code runs when, right? Or make things run after a certain event happens. And that's what events are. For example, say I have a part right here. Beautiful, very smooth part. I walk up to it. I stand on it. Event has happened. There is a built-in event that will detect when you touch this, or anything else. Pretty much any object that you can see has a touched event. If you want to see what all events are of every class, item, thing, you can check it all out at developer.roblox.com. Whoa. What? Anyway, I'm not worried about this. What you're looking for is, we're going to search the part class. And you got right there, API reference for the part. What is a part? That's not for me to explain. That's for this. So you got the properties, you got down here the functions, and you got the events. Technically, these are called RBX script signals, but we just call them events. Every class has its own stuff you can use. It's all built in. You can check everything here. Alright, enough of this website. So if we run the game, we could check and see right here the script name has changed to hello. If we want to have this code that we wrote just right here ran whenever we want to call this function, say connect it to an event or something, basically we're just going to wrap it in this little function thing. A function is a little bit of code that you can call at any time from any part of the script. If we want this little line here that changes the name of the script to hello to be in a function, all we have to do is this. So you just type function, press enter, it wraps itself in this thing, function end. That end right there is a terminating statement, which means that everything in here, the code between these lines, is wrapped up in this one function. This end says that this is the end of the function. So this defines bounds for where you can put code. Even if we did put code in the middle here, say you wanted to change the name to hello again, you might notice it's not letting us do this. Well, that's because the function has to have a name. How do we call a function if it doesn't have a name? This is so you can tell your functions apart. Let's name this rename. And these little parentheses right here, don't worry too much about them just yet. Just know that you have to have that after the name of the function. There are rules for naming functions like there are rules for naming variables, and I haven't really covered variables just yet. For now, you could just name the function a word or two. Just don't use spaces in the names, and avoid using special characters like symbols. So we have this function here called rename. It changes the script name to hello. If we run the game, well, you see the script name hasn't changed. That's because this function does not run unless we call it. So we have this function defined, and it's a working function, but it won't actually run unless we tell it to. So in another point of the code, outside of the function, we have to say this. It's like the print function. The print thing is a built-in function of Roblox. If we print hi, it's pretty much the same thing. Print is something that is Roblox's version of output. In the output menu right here in the view tab, whatever you print will show up here. In our function, you don't have to put any text or anything in here because it doesn't have any parameters. In the last video, I brought up parameters. And basically, it's just data you pass through. The print function expects you to pass it text or some kind of object or reference of some sort. And what it does is it takes that and just shoves it into that little output menu. That text you send through is the argument, and the text it expects you to send through is the parameter. Roblox is a little bit funky compared to other coding languages because you can't define exactly what type of parameter has to be. In other coding languages, you could say, this is supposed to have text. You're supposed to send this text. But in Roblox, you just say, okay, this is supposed to have one thing sent. Or it's supposed to have two things. You don't even have to send the second thing. It's up to you. Let me show you what I mean. If we want this rename function to have the option to rename it to whatever data you send it, like you send it text, it renames the script to that text. To do that, we have to add a parameter. And to add a parameter, All we have to do is put something between these parentheses right here. Not this. Don't worry about that yet. But this up here at the top. Function rename. Put something between these parentheses. In a way, it is a variable. I'll go into variables in another video because they can have so many forms. This should be a good introduction. Parameters are simple forms of variables. So we expect this rename function to be sent some piece of data. We don't know what it is, but we know something needs to be sent. And if we want to check what was sent, we have to give it a name. The name of the first piece of data that is sent. We have to define it. Let's just call it something like name. So now we have access to whatever data they sent through. We don't know if it's a string or not. We don't know if it's text. But we know that something may or may not have been sent through. They could have sent nothing. If you want to check if they sent nothing, there's a simple way to do that. This requires the use of conditional statements. In the simplest form, it's just if this condition is met, then this code is run. That condition can be anything. All that matters is the condition will pass and let the other code run if that condition returns true. You probably don't care about that part right now because you know exactly what you're going to be sending to this. You're going to send it text for now. I'll cover that after I'm done with this little segment. We can assume it's going to be a string. We don't really care if it's not a string right now. We know we're going to send it a string. This is like a temporary variable. The scope, otherwise known as where it can be used, is inside of this function. Anywhere in here, you can start using this reference. Now we know this is going to be text because we're in control here. We're going to send it text. So instead of putting the actual text here, let's just replace that with name. There we go. And what that's going to do is whatever data you send through this thing, the script name is going to attempt to be changed to whatever data you send through. If it's not acceptable, say you send it like color or something, it's not going to work. It's going to give you an error. So now we have this function. Again, it won't run unless we call it. So let's go back down here and, the rename thing. But this time, it expects you to send it something. Because if you don't, the script name is trying to be set to something you never sent it. In Roblox, they call this nil. N-I-L. It's a weird word. Not 100% sure why they chose nil. So we gotta send it text, right? Just like the print function. If we want to print hello, we put text between the parentheses using quotation marks like usual for text. We could do the same here. If we want to rename the script to hello, we'd tell it hello. So you have a function called rename. It expects one piece of data to be sent over, and then it expects it to be text, because the name can only be set to text. And below that, we have a function call. The function rename is being called with the text hello. Now, if we finally run the script, you will see the script name has changed. This is a very simple way of explaining it. You kind of have to be thrown into it before you can start getting it. Eventually, after seeing enough examples, I'm sure you'll catch on. In fact, at the end of this video, I'll give you something to try to figure out. Anyway, I'm going to move on. You could have multiple parameters if you want. Say we wanted a second parameter called delay. If you notice that something turns into a different color after typing it, you're probably messing with something that's already built in. Like if I wanted to call this wait, you can't do that because there is something in Roblox that is called wait, and it's going to interfere with what's already built in. So let's call it something that's not already used. How about seconds? So now we have two parameters, name and seconds. You put a comma to separate them. You can have as many commas and as many things as you want, as long as you don't use two names for the same thing in the same function. So I can't put seconds and then seconds again. It won't tell you anything is wrong, but they're definitely going to interfere, and it's going to be very confusing to work with. So make sure all your names are different. So what am I going to do with the seconds thing? I'm going to put a delay on it. Say I don't want to change the name instantly, but I want to wait after a given amount of seconds. You can control that by sending it how many seconds you want it to wait. How do you delay in Roblox code? You got this magical thing called wait. I wouldn't recommend doing this kind of thing in other coding languages, but in Roblox, it'll help you a lot. It's another built-in function, just like that print function from earlier. Instead, this one takes a number. Let's give it seconds, since we know that's the number we're going to give it when we send the data through. What happens here is, the function starts running here, just like I said in the last video, code runs from top to bottom. In functions, it's like this subset of code. It'll start here, and then it'll go all the way through, down, and then once it hits this end line, it stops. When code is being ran in a script, it kind of skips over this kind of stuff, because this is more of the backlog of things that it has to know. because it doesn't run functions when you start the script or when the script is run. Like I said earlier, they only run when you call them. So the script starts on this line, and then it's like, oh, function goes here, and it hits this wait thing right here. What this will do is pause the script at this point and wait the amount of time that you send it, and after that amount of time has passed, it'll start running the next part again. It's important to note that this does pause the whole script because this is a function called from the global space here. When the script pauses inside of this function, it pauses here too. If I were to type print A, this will not run until this function is completed all the way through, even after the wait. So the script starts here, and then goes up here, does this, it has to wait, and then blah blah blah, change the name, and then it goes back down here, because it has finished running this function that you've called. You haven't sent it a time, and the wait function needs a time to be sent. But we can control this. Say we want to wait 10 seconds, we just put a comma, we put 10. It's like replacing this. This and this part are the same thing. Just one of them is the instructions of what you have to do, one of them is what you're doing. Let's head over and see what happens. So it should wait 10 seconds before changing the name of the script. You see right here, the script name is script. Let's wait a little second. Okay. If you're wondering what happens when a script errors, why would I care about errors? Well, if your script errors, it stops running. That's not good. So you want to avoid that at all costs. It also spams your output menu, and that's... So hopefully you have a basic grasp with functions now. You write code, you call the function, you give it data, it does what you do with it. That's pretty much all you gotta do with functions. There are ways you can optimize it, there are ways you can return data, but that's the basics. What I mean by return is you have this return statement that's built in. It's part of the function. It has to be within the function, and when this return statement is hit, it's like if it hit the end statement right here. It'll stop running the function, and it'll continue back where it left off, down here. But the reason this is nice is because you can manually tell a function to stop at a certain point if you wanted to. Or you could return data based on what happens inside the function. Here's a simple example. Let's make a function called add. Put two parentheses. Let's say we need two numbers to be expected. We expect this function is going to take two numbers, add them together, and then give you the result. So let's name the numbers something unique. Number 1 and number 2. How about that? Number 1, put a comma, number 2. You hit enter, it'll already put that in there for you. So if we wanted to say print number 1 plus number 2, you could just do it like this. Print number 1 plus number 2. And that's all fine. It'll print it to the output menu. But what if you actually want to use this piece of data? What if you don't want to just print it? What if you want it to be used in the game? Well, this is a nice thing that you can do with return statements. If you type return and put data here, you can have it return data whatever you want in the function. It can be very useful in certain cases. You can make helper functions, things that do math for you, things that just make it easier to make a game. You can call the function the same way, given a number 1, like let's say pick a nice number 1, pick an even better number, 7. 7 is better than 1. So we got two numbers here. Number 1 is going to be 1. Number 2 is going to be 7. So that's nice. It'll run the code, it'll run that function, but nothing's going to happen. It sends this data over, but it's not told to do anything with it. It just has this data. That's not going to mean it's going to error. It just means it finishes the code. We can set values, we can set properties, we can print it. Let's just do printing for now since that's the easiest way to see it. This function call right here returns data, and that data can be used anywhere you want. So you just slap that baby in that print function, hit that play button, check the output, you got your answer. 8. And yes, 1 plus 7 is 8. It's probably a lot to take in, there's probably some things you don't get, but that's the whole point. You're not going to get everything as soon as you look at it. Every concept in programming has to come together. Some things you can't understand without learning other things before that. Like, for this part, it's going to be a little bit weird. Knowing variables would make this a lot simpler. But I think learning this first would make variables a lot simpler. I won't leave you in the dark though, I'll be sure to make that variables video soon. Alright, section 2 of this video is going to be events. Events are a lot simpler than functions. Events are just a way to connect when things happen to a function. Let's delete this script and start with this part right here. I'm going to anchor this because I don't want it to slide around all over the place. And maybe I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Now we have this nice little platform. It's anchored in place. It won't be moved when I stand on it or walk away from it or walk on it. You know, Roblox physics can be kind of janky sometimes. So right now when you step on it or jump on it, nothing happens. So we're going to attach a script to this, put it inside of the part. And the reason for this is because putting the script inside of the part makes it really easy to locate the part. Instead of having to look through the workspace and find the part wherever it is, if we look through the properties menu, there's a parent property of the script. So we can access this property directly from the script. And by reading this property, it leads us to the part. The special keyword is script. And like any other object, you can access all of its properties and stuff by using a dot. Let's do dot parent. Now we have access to the parent of the script, which is the part. The script is inside the part. Parent is outside the script. It's the parent of the script. The script is the child of the parent, which is the part. I already did this last video. I did this explanation. Watch that introduction to scripting video if you really care about that whole child-parent thing. So we have reference to the part, which is the parent of the script. What are we going to do with it? We're going to find the event that is triggered when you touch it. When you touch the part. It doesn't necessarily mean when you, the player, touches it. It just fires whenever something touches the part, such as another part. To do this, it's the same thing as accessing a property. We just do dot. You can look through this whole menu, see all the stuff you can access. If there's a blue icon, that means it's a property. If there's a yellow lightning bolt icon, that means it's an event. If there's this weird shape thing at the bottom here, I'm not really sure what the heck that is, but if you see that, it's an object. Some things have functions too, but you won't get that by using a dot. You have to use a colon. So if we want to find this event of the parent, which is the part, you can look through all these things they have for you here. You may not be familiar with all of these just yet, but the one we're looking for right now is touched. If you want to do something with this event, you have to use a colon at this point. Events have their own functions to them. You have two options here. You can connect it to a function, or you can wait. If you answer this wait option here, what this will do is pause the script at this point until this event has happened. You don't really have a lot of control over this. The script will wait until this event happens, okay? We don't want that option right now. We're going to use the connect function. You get this thing that looks like all the function stuff we were dealing with earlier. It looks like this little segment of code right after that colon there is like its own function, right? It's just like the print function or that custom function we made about renaming the script. But instead, this time it's attached to this event called touched. So this function called connect expects you to send it a function as a data type. Just like that rename function expects you to send it text, or the print function expects you to send it text or number or some other kind of reference. There are many different ways to do this, but for simplicity's sake, we'll make a function before we start doing this. Say, let's call it test. When this function is fired, let's make it print A. So whenever this function is run, we will know it ran. So as an argument, we have to send over this function. To reference this function, we're going to need to send it the function name. However, we're not running this function necessarily. We're just sending it over. We're telling it, this is the function I want you to run whenever this touched event happens. So whenever we enter this in here as an argument, we just type test. We don't need to add more parentheses. We can just leave it how it is. So in essence, we have binded this test function to this touched event using this connect function here on the event. You can check it out in play mode. You might notice it's getting spammed because there are lots of touches happening when you touch it. It's not just one touch when you jump on it. Both of your feet are touching it. Your hitboxes are touching it. Your feet are touching it multiple times, in fact. Now, if we want extra control over what's happening here, we can check what touches it. And that's where things start getting more based on you have to know the API to know what you're doing at this point. Luckily, we have this beautiful manual at developer.roblox.com that tells us all the stuff that's sent over, all the data, all the magic back behind the scenes stuff. So if we want to know what this touch event gives you to work with, let's head over to the wiki. Ah yes, the part page. Scroll down to the touched event. You'll find it right here. you get this nice little page that details everything that this touch event gives you to work with. So you'll notice right here, the touch event has one parameter. Right here they call it other part. It doesn't really have an official name, but all you need to know is this gives you a part. So when this event happens, your function will be sent one argument, which is a part. So just like that function before, we need to add this parameter so we can deal with it. Let's call it part. So this touch event is going to give us a part. Now the part is a reference to the object that touches it. We know in fact that this is going to be a part because the wiki said right here on the description section the other part that came in contact with the given part. So knowing that it's a part, just like this one and this one, we know that they have all these properties and pieces of data we're familiar with, like the name. So if we want to check what part touched this thing, we can print the part name. We can access this using part.name. Just like the script is its own thing, the part becomes its own variable. The part keyword and the script keyword are both references to objects. Script is a reference to this script. The part is a reference to whatever part just touched this thing, using this touched event right here. So let's go check it out. Open up the output menu. Let's step on this. So we can see all the things that just touched it. It may not look like they actually physically touched it, but a lot of your body parts, including your lower legs, which are these thigh areas, made contact with this, because their hitboxes extend past what they visually look like. And some things have touched it multiple times. In fact, if we jump off of it, they make more collisions. In fact, the way Roblox registers touches is if something moves while it's intersecting another part. So if we wanted to count 1,000,000 touches here, all we have to do is to spin around, even though we're not really touching it multiple times, because we're moving while our body parts are intersecting with this. So if we only want this function to be able to be ran at most once a second, we can use variables to our advantage here. A variable is pretty much this custom reference you can create to whatever piece of data, whatever object, whatever number, whatever you want. You can create your own reference in a script at a given point. Just like this function has its part reference and the built-in script reference, these are references to objects. But we can have references to text, functions, all kinds of things. In fact, a function is a data type. What most people do is make a Boolean variable, which is a value that can be true or false. It is true when the function can be ran, and it is false when the function cannot be ran. So in the initial condition, let's say yes, this function can be run. So let's name it something simple. We don't really have to worry about it too much. Let's name it like debounce. And let's set it to true, because we know that this function can be run on the initial state. Now if we want to check this value, we want to read this value, we want to set this value, we can use conditional statements and we can just modify the value directly, just like the way we set it here. So how do we make a cooldown using just one variable? Well, it's actually pretty simple, but we have to use a conditional statement. A conditional statement is a line of code that will check if this condition you give it is true. And if it is true, the code you give it will be ran. All we have to do is type if. Now we need a condition. Let's say this value debounce right here, this needs to be true. If this function can run, this value has to be true. So to check if it's true, we type debounce double equals true. And the reason for the double is because this is how conditions work. If you put one equal sign, it thinks you're trying to set the value of it. Just know that when you're checking the value of something using an if statement or conditional statement of any kind, you need two equal signs if you're checking if it's equal to this value. There's a lot more you can do here, but for now, we'll deal with this. Now, there is another keyword we have to use here. This is mostly just a Roblox thing, but we have to type then after the conditional statement we've typed here. This kind of defines the bounds of where the condition is. This tells Roblox that this right here, this is what has to be checked for a condition. What's between the if and the then. So we press enter here, gives us a nice little end segment. So now, just like the function here, there is a new scope. Anything between the then and the end here are now their own subset of code. This will only be run if this condition right here is true. We can also check if it's false. Say we only run it if it's false. But in our case, we want to check if it's true. So when the function is run, this is going to be checked if it's true. Now only if it's true, we can make it get set to false. Why would we want to do this? Well, now this code here cannot be run again until we manually set it to true again. And we can do that with the wait. Say we wanted to wait 1 second and then have this value true again. So you use the wait keyword from earlier and put a 1. 1 second. Now down here, right below that, we set it back to true. To put it simply, this code in between these conditional statement lines cannot be run again until this value right here is true, which only happens 1 second after this code has been run. But the print statement here is outside of the scope of this conditional statement. In fact, it's within the scope of the whole function right here, so it will always be run whenever this function is run. Let's put that back here inside of these lines. I'm going to put this before the wait because you want this to happen as soon as it's triggered. You don't want it to happen after the cooldown is finished, right? So now we have this code that will only print the part name that touches it after 1 second has passed since the last time it was run. Let's test it out. Touch. 1 second. There we go. As you can see, there's a multiplier here, times 2. It's going to be times 3 soon. Oh, never mind. What that times 2 means is there's 2 of these. This has been printed 2 times. So every time I walk on this, it cannot print the next thing until 1 second has passed, because we have a 1 second cooldown built into it now. There's a lot you're going to be confused about, but that's totally normal. It takes time and practice to get this down. If you watched the last video, you may remember I asked you if you could figure out how to make a random color changing base plate all on its own, and I didn't tell you how to do it. Some of you did message me your code, and it worked. Some of them were more complicated than they needed to be, but I'll show you what I did. So I used a different keyword here that I've never shown on the series yet, the while keyword. This is kind of like an if statement. It requires a condition to be met. However, this one's a little bit special. This one will repeat the code that you give it until this condition is not met. So say we had a variable called can run, and let's set it to true. So if we did if can run equals true, then anything in this would be run like usual. This is a classic conditional statement. You can also use the while keyword, and it's just like an if statement. You would do the condition right here, if can run equals true. But instead of if, it's while, and instead of then, it's do. Instead, what happens here is repeated, and that can be bad. If you let this go as fast as it can without any delay, it will crash, or it'll time out, which means it won't work anymore. So let's put a little print statement in here. Let's print hello, but this time in all caps because it's different. And we don't want this to run as fast as it can, so I'm going to add a little wait here. This is considered messy code, but for our case, this is an example. It doesn't really matter all that much. We'll worry about optimization in the future. But this will print hello every frame, and that will be a loop. You can see that hello is being printed at insane speeds because it's running very, very fast. Where an if statement would go top to bottom and then stop, this goes top to bottom, hits the end statement, and then starts back where the while loop is. If this variable can run were to be set to false at some point, the loop would stop because this condition is no longer met, and then it would continue down here if there's any code. I'm going to move this script over to the base plate, so now I can easily access the base plate without having to find it. And instead of having this condition here where I could manually stop it, I know I don't want to stop it, so instead of having a condition here, how about something that's always going to be true? True. True is always going to be true. This is also seen as messy because it's an uncontrolled loop. And it's not even a good kind of loop, it's the while loop. The while loop is not very optimized. So in this while loop, I'm accessing the base plate, and I'm accessing the color of it. However, if you're making color values, it can be a little tedious at times. And there's a way easier way to do this if you use brick color. Brick color is like the color property, but worse. However, you can type brick color.random, and that's awesome. Brick color is kind of its own thing here. Now, yes, this will change the brick color of the base plate to a random color, but we need to add a wait here. It's gonna be so laggy and it would be so eye-jarring. Let's check it out. Every 1 second, this will change into a different color, a random color, from the brick color selection, which is a very small collection, might I add. Color 3 is better. Don't use brick color. If you wanted to use colors instead of brick colors, you would have to do something like this. This is your view into what you'll be doing in the future. This will be a piece of cake to you once you get into this stuff. What does this change? Well, now we don't have to be limited by the brick color selection. Now you can see the color range here is a lot more broad, and we're not limited to whatever they have built in. Now we can use all the RGB spectrum. Now it's time to give you your coding challenge. My task for you is to make a new function. You can name it whatever you want. It needs two parameters. The first parameter needs to be a Boolean value. It should either be true or false. The second parameter has to be a number. It can be any number. It could even be text, I guess, if you want it to be. In this function, I want you to print that number, but only when that Boolean you send it is false. So you need a conditional statement that checks if that Boolean is false, and only then will it print that number. I will reveal my little code snippet for that in the next video. Feel free to go back in the video to see if you missed something, or just to help you with that little challenge I've given you. Best of luck. Bye. My voice cracked. That was... Oh god, that was like an hour and a half of recording. Jesus.